Okay, so today we are going to be discussing strategies and tools for implementing the transformative social and emotional learning, the TSEL standards and framework in your learning environment. And all of you know now, I'm Shelby Diaz. Um, I'm on the Student Behavioral Health and Wellness team. I'm the School Improvement Specialist here at the SOESD. And I will share this slide deck out with you if you're interested in seeing our website. All the videos that we do for the mini training events are recorded and housed there. So our objectives today are really kind of just to take a broad look at the foundations of transformative social emotional learning, including how it differs from traditional social emotional learning. We'll have an opportunity to explore some strategies and tools to integrate the TSEL practices into our daily and weekly classroom routines. And at the end, you'll have a chance to develop a personalized plan where you'll get to implement one or more of these TSEL-aligned practices for your own teaching environment. So just a really brief history of transformative social emotional learning. Um, the It's two parts. So there are the social emotional learning standards, which are K through 12 social emotional learning standards. And then there's also the learning framework. And we'll be taking a look at both of those. Most people now at this point have heard that, you know, the framework and the standards will have been implemented by July of last year. Which is kind of an ironic thing to say, but the first round of reporting will take place this fall, and ODE is going to be providing some more guidance about that, which is exciting to learn a little bit more about what the requirements for reporting are going to be. But from my understanding is that at this point, it really is going to be like, what are you doing now, and what's kind of a simple goal or a plan of something that you hope to achieve. So it doesn't sound like at this point that it will have a long requirement list for the reporting, but really just keeping in mind like, hey, what are we already doing that is showing that we're integrating some of these practices, and what's a goal that we want to move forward with or an area of growth. So it's really not outside of, you know, the way of thinking that we're used to implementing goals. So we'll spend a couple minutes of just thinking about how social emotional learning compares and contrasts to the transformative approach to social emotional learning. So you can see here, these are both definitions put out by Castle. They are really a nonprofit that has put out a lot of resources around social emotional learning throughout the previous decade or so. And the first is their definition of social emotional learning, and their second is the definition of transformative social emotional learning. So I'll give you just a moment to kind of take a look at those and think about what stands out in your mind that's kind of creating that difference between the two. And this is kind of a nice graphic that shows like the spectrum of social emotional learning. So a lot of the language that you saw in that previous slide was really about like that personal responsibility. So it's focused on developing the skills for risk prevention, the individual well-being, and the personal well-being. And then you can see all the way on the right-hand side is the transformative approach. So it's those skills as well as being able to build interpersonal relationships and community building. So all of that and skills needed to ensure a democratic, fair, and inclusive community. So it's really about like the internal and then being able to, know who you really are in a way that you're able to make an impact outside of yourself onto your community to affect change. Here's another side by side. So on the left-hand side, you can see the 5 competencies of social emotional learning of self-management, self-awareness, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And on the right-hand side are the focal constructs that are part of the transformative aspect of social emotional learning. So with self-awareness, we have identity, agency, and self-management, belonging and social awareness, responsible decision-making and curiosity, relationship skills, and collaborative problem solving. And here again, we've landed at this braided approach. So we have like a braid or a stalk of wheat where they're interwoven. So the competencies and the transformative social emotional learning focal constructs, as they're calling them. And as you saw in one of the first slides, besides the learning standards that are available, really I think at this point, the framework is really where we're at right now. And this is a lot even to digest without even jumping into the standards. So the transformative social emotional learning framework consists of the guiding principles. And so you can see that on the graphic here. It's like the roots, right? So those are the foundational values and beliefs. Up above, overarching, so the ecosystem, the conditions for learning and thriving. These are the policies and practices that cultivate an ecosystem for the transformative social emotional learning to thrive. And then within, so grounded in those guiding principles and within that condition, those conditions for learning and thriving, then we have the adult TSEL. So that's our well-being, which, and a huge part of that is professional learning. And then finally, we get to the student TSEL, and you can see that's embedded within the adult's hands there, and including in the conditions for learning and thriving, the 5 social emotional learning standards. And each one of those standards has practices and growth indicators so that we can really see like how children are moving through these standards. The guiding principles are culturally responsiveness, community responsiveness, being strengths-based, trauma-informed, and grounded in neuroscience. So a lot of this is work that districts and learning communities have already been doing for a very long time. So we're really just trying to gather so much of that important work that has already been happening and bringing it into the forefront, as you know, and kind of helping to create this mindset of transformative social emotional learning. Because again, it's really like the learning standards are pretty robust, and it's, I think Erin was kind of touching on this. It's like we are continuing to ask educators to do more, right? And with that, there's always something that's going to be lost. And right now, where I'm at with the TSEL is really about like not doing more, but really about doing it differently. And so the reason I like that approach is that it's integrated. So one thing that's really important to realize about the TSEL is it doesn't necessarily have to be lost time for academics, right? So it's not TSEL or academics. It's really both of them together. It's not like, do we have a kid doing a social emotional learning lesson on a computer by themselves? right? And they're not practicing their math or their reading or their writing or anything like that. Or how do we bridge that? How do we bring social emotional learning into our content area, into our content classrooms and into our subject areas so that students are getting both throughout their day? So the ideal conditions for learning and thriving are that the TSEL is embedded in the curriculum that's already being taught. It's part of the school and the community processes. So we should be able to see what's happening in a school that's really using this integrated approach. We would recognize that from the moment we open that door. So what evidences are we seeing that the school and the community has really brought it into their own processes? Um, it's part of modeling, teaching, coaching, and providing feedback. So we're keeping all of those guiding principles in mind as we're creating our policy, as we're thinking about how we're guiding teachers, and how we're asking teachers to teach, and how, as even for administrators, how they're conducting their own professional learning opportunities or staff meetings, and they're doing their own modeling to their staff. Um, it's integrated by designing learning environments. So being really intentional about how we're creating our supportive learning environments for our students. Because remember that one of those guiding principles was that it's grounded in neuroscience, that it's culturally responsive. So how are we including all of that into our intentional learning environment? And then making sure that the integrated TSEL approach is that it's experienced beyond just one block of the day. So it's not just, hey, this is our SEL time and we're going to do a lesson now, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's great to teach that explicitly. And then what do you do with that so that you're embedding it throughout the rest of your school day and into your content area practices? So I'm going to show a little video. This is social emotional learning integrated with academic instruction. It's about 5 minutes.
Alongside families,
Can you guys hear that okay?
schools play a significant role in supporting young people's social and emotional development. Setting aside
Uh-oh.
It was very low volume, Shelby.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
families and communities, schools play a significant role in supporting young people's social and emotional development. Setting aside time to teach a set of skills in a specific environment is critical, but so is making sure SEL is woven into daily school life. This integration falls into three categories: academic mindset, or how students think about their own learning; aligned SEL and academic objectives, or the content students learn; and interactive pedagogy, or how students learn.
When we think about academic integration of SEL, we think about building our students' mindsets as learners. We think about integrating social and emotional competence standards into our academic standards so the lesson is actually accomplishing both. And we think about the way in which we do that.
When a teacher understands that their job isn't solely to teach academic content, but to really help a student grow in their learning by expressing care and concern, by providing support, and communicating high expectations, then the educator is truly fostering the first foundational category in integrative SEL, the academic mindset.
A teacher that is really successful at integrating social, emotional, and academic learning recognizes that one, learning is a social enterprise and you're in a room with lots of other people. So paying attention to the social interactions and deepening the connections between people and building friendships and relationships across classmates is really critical because you're all in there learning together. And then the second piece is connecting to each individual and understanding like what's their entry point into this. And the more you know your students as human beings, the more you can kind of help them make those connections.
These aligned SEL and academic objectives The second category in integrated SEL instruction commingle through group work, respectful debates, journaling, and lessons.
A math class, for example, that looks at fractions can be treated in a very conventional way, which just says these are numbers of a kind and they are parts of wholes and displayed geometrically and things like that. In a social emotional fashion, what you would do is you would tie that indeed to relevant topics to the learner themselves, because fractions incorporate divisions and distributions. And our youth around the nation, around the world even, know that some things are distributed fairly and unfairly. And so an understanding of mathematics from the context of what it means to share equally is rooted in some very specific actual lived problems and circumstances. So that kind of a lesson, rather than it simply being about numbers and symbols, becomes about actual lived and culturally relevant experience.
We've always known that relationships are key to helping kids feel comfortable and to achieve at school. It's not something that we do, it's part of who we are. We try to bring their lives to what they're learning. And I think that is something that kind of helps the trust, the respect, the emotional growth of students. There are times when they're sitting in circles and are talking about something that maybe happened in history and the emotions that were going on in there. What do you think people were thinking? Why is it different now than it was then?
The third aspect of integrated SEL is the interactive pedagogy, or method of teaching. It allows for well-facilitated classroom discussions, student self-assessments, partner work, and student voice.
So if you were to walk into a classroom where SEL is integrated into the day, you would see experiences and lessons where students are interacting a lot with each other, that the student's voice is as present, if not more present than the teacher's voice, that the students have opportunities to deeply reflect on the material, on their own social emotional competence, on ways in which the material relates to their personal lives. They'd have opportunities to reflect on the bigger experience and how that fits in. So they would be much more engaged in a deeply more personal way with each other and with the material that allows them to both process the material and to develop their own social emotional competence at the same time.
Integrated SEL is rooted in relationship, whether that's teacher to scholar or peer to peer. The modeled behavior speaks the loudest.
If you are struggling day in and day out, it does not matter how much planning and preparation you put in, okay? You have to make sure that you build the relationships with scholars, any veteran you talk to. I don't care what business industry you're in. If you want successful people working with you and around you, you have to make sure you build those relationships. You have to communicate. The same thing goes for a classroom, okay? When you're leading that classroom, you have to make sure that you have that connection, that you're empathetic with the children.
Okay. Great. Well, hopefully that was inspiring for you guys. I like the way that they kind of break it down, and their approach to the integration, I think, is really, really positive and really doable. And I think that that's really the part that educators at this time are feeling is it's like, how do I do this and that? How do I teach science and create time for SEL? And so what we're gonna do a little bit this afternoon is like I said, practice how we can do both at once. And we're just make it really simple. So another couple of points about the integration is that it's really developmentally appropriate, meaning that unlike the other content standards, it is not written in grade bands. It builds on the unique strengths that the students already have. Part of the adult SEL you can see there is it honors lifelong learning. So there is no, well, you're not doing this yet, right? Like this is where you're at, and let's practice what skills we can in order to increase communication, responsible decision making, whatever it is the skill is that you're looking for the students. It's accessible to all the students. So they talked about they're like the entry point, right? If you have a relationship with your student, you have that entry point. So therefore, you know your student's entry point so that they do have a way into your lesson, whatever it is that you're teaching. It affirms that stress and toxic stress and traumatic stress can impact SEL development, and acknowledges that everyone can show up differently along the progression, and that there is no one size fits all or scripted approach. So teaching SEL is going to look different. If you're a sixth grade teacher, it's going to look different every single group of sixth graders that's walking in through your door, just depending on who those people are. So some of the strategies and tools that I'm offering today are listed here. So we have co-created norms and values, and this is really that, community building. And this is something that I think is so key for every classroom. And it's something that can just kind of die as the year goes on. So, like we said, this is it needs to be brought back into the learning and into the learning again and again and again. So when we think about student voice, it's like we can co-create that with our students the first time. And then how do we turn over some of that ownership and bring in more of their voice as the year progresses? So asking them like, hey, what is working? What isn't working? What have we already mastered? What is it that we're still needing to focus on? So being willing to turn some of that leadership over to them, they're going to come up with what is developmentally appropriate for them at that time. They will lead. Another strategy and tool is to use reflective practices and strength-based dialogue. So, using language like I noticed, I wonder, I feel, and I need. All of these things are great for, turning some of that responsibility over for the student for their learning. So instead of answering questions, when a student's asking questions, how can we turn that around so that they're the ones who are doing the thinking? When we give them that responsibility, they often will step up to that. And then using strength-based dialogue. So again, it is important that the students are learning the academic content, and we can, if it's very challenging and there's rigor involved, students are going to be heightened, right? So how can we bring in some strength-based dialogue and reflective practices so that the students are being like, what am I using internally in order to succeed here, in order to push myself, in order to help another student? So how did we show care for each other during this lesson? That was really hard, right? That's really developing the student's social emotional learning skills as they're working on academic rigor. Academic integration overall. So really creating these collaborative learning structures that require communication and listening and perspective taking. I think kind of mentioned in the video, like a fractions lesson, right? You can do that the good old fashioned way, or you can turn it into a collaborative learning process where students are needing to, come up with a way of solving the problem, talk about it with the partner, share it with the class. So anything can be turned into a collaborative learning practice that's using those social emotional learning skills. A couple of examples that they give that we have here are like discussing empathy in literature. There's a million different ways that we can apply, right? What does ethical decision making look like in history? So those are just broad ideas, but just to kind of get the mindset shifted over, right? Where again, it's not another and, it's a with, right? It's both together. We can do identity affirming check-ins. So one idea that I really like is bringing in more storytelling with the students. So, giving them prompts throughout the day to bring their own voice and their own identity into the classroom. And in the video that we saw, you know, they talk a lot about these relationship moments. How are we getting to know our students, even outside of those morning circle times, right? We can really get to know our students at repeated relationship moments throughout the day. And one way that we can do that is acknowledging them, acknowledging their effort. So yes, it is important that they are completing their work and that they are getting the academics, but really noticing their effort too. I saw how hard you work to understand that. So great, you understand it. And I saw that it wasn't easy and you did it anyway. So these are just a couple of strategies and tools. And we're going to do a little bit of social emotional learning strategy mapping. So if you have a piece of paper handy, it can just be a piece of scratch paper. It doesn't need to be anything official. Just something that you can write some notes on today and then take with you into your learning environment. So it's just 5 steps. So like I said, we're not even digging into the standards today. We're simply looking at the competencies and the focal constructs. So you can choose a competency or a construct or both. Include a subject or a content area or a standard. So what academic standard are you teaching? What social emotional learning competency and construct are you going to integrate? Choose a strategy or a tool to implement it. Set your implementation timeline, and then prepare to write reflection notes, because of course the adult SEL is also embedded in this. So you're going to reflect on your own practices and how it impacted student learning and student growth. So what we'll do first is to start where you already are. So you can kind of like think about a time maybe when you've already done something that is integrated with social emotional learning, because I'm sure that you already have, right? Like really think about that and be intentional about it. So we'll start where we are. What are we already doing? And here's an example. So bringing in the competency and construct of self-awareness and identity. And then I chose a math standard, a 3rd grade math standard, interpret products of whole numbers, multiplication. And I'm bringing in a reflective practice. So this is a question that I would propose to my students or pose to my students for them to write about, think about, and talk with a partner. What part of having a growth mindset will I need to use to solve these problems? So you could do this, you know, after your direct instruction and before they're going to do some independent work practice. What part of having a growth mindset will I need to use to solve these problems? So the implementation timeline is that students will reflect before the lesson and at the end of the lesson how it went using that piece of their growth mindset. So I pose the question, have them do their independent work, and then at the end, hey, how did that go? I heard you say that you were going to really engage in some struggle there, right? And not give up. So ask them to do a little bit of reflection about that at the end of their lesson. And then for my own reflection notes, I would say students were able to persevere when solving problems outside of their zone of proximal development. So that's my own reflection. Okay, does this seem doable? Okay, so just take a minute and here's an example. Here are the 5 steps, and make a couple notes about it. You may not have your standard, but you can just even think about a subject area or a lesson that you taught, just so that you can get practiced with these steps with something that you've already done, and then we'll set a goal around it. So I'll give you just a couple of minutes to go through these 5 steps with something that you've already practiced. Okay, how's everybody doing? Any questions about this before we move on to the goal piece? Okay. Okay, sweet. So, all right. So this is like your next step for moving forward. So, maybe think about a lesson that you're going to be teaching tomorrow, this week, next week, a unit that you know that you're going to have coming up. Same type of idea. And again, like when you're choosing your competency and your construct, it's kind of like which one do you do first, step 1 or step 2, right? It really doesn't matter. You can be so creative when you're coming up with these ideas. And depending on what type of classroom structure you have, it's going to look at really different teacher to teacher, teacher by teacher. So you can think about